A Little Yuletide Murder, Chapter 4. Judging from Robert Brent's loud, angry voice, which was clearly heard in the living room, he wasn't keen on coming downstairs, but Patricia prevailed. 5 minutes later, he followed her into the living room. He wore jeans, ankle-high military-style boots, a blue sweatshirt with gold figures on it that looked like some sort of military ranger boots, and a blue baseball cap worn backward. "Robert, you know Sheriff Metzer and Mrs. Fletcher," Patricia said. His response was to glare at us. Mort said, "Thought you wouldn't mind coming down with me to town, Robert. You know, just to have a little chat about what happened to your dad." Robert looked at his mother, who smiled demurely and nodded. "Won't take very long," Mort added. "Of course, if you'd rather not, we can talk here." "About Jake Welter?" Robert asked. Mort looked at me before saying, "Sure, we can talk about Jake. Talk about anything you like. I'm not being arrested or anything, am I?" Robert asked. "I didn't do anything. Jake shot my father." Mort's chuckle was forced. "Of course you're not being arrested for anything, Rob. Like I said, you could help me understand a little bit more about what happened. I'd be right interested in hearing about Jake Welter and why you think he might have shot your father." "Not might have shot my father," Robert said angrily. He did it." "You saw him do it?" I asked, surprised at how adamant he was. Robert ignored my question and said to Mort, "I don't mind going with you. Are we driving in your car?" Mort nodded. "Unless you'd rather come in your own." Robert shook his head. "I'll come with you." He looked at me. "Are you coming too?" "Yes," I said. "Sheriff Metzer drove me out here and will bring me home, but I won't be with you when you and the sheriff have your talk." That seemed to satisfy him. While the conversation was taking place, I observed Patricia Brent, living in the semi-rural part of the country, had put me in contact with any farmers, men and women who live off the soil and were not unduly touched by the world's modern thinking. They tend to be a stoic lot. I don't mean that in a disparaging way. It's just that it has been my experience that such people are not glib, much to their credit. There's too much glibness in the world as far as I'm concerned. But at a time like this, when the loved one has been found murdered, you would expect even the most dour of individuals to display some emotion, some sign of deep pain and hurt. Not so with Patricia. She was as calm and placid as though we were there picking up her son to take him to a basketball game. I had to remind myself to not be judgmental. Either of us handles grief in his or her own way. When my husband Frank died years ago, I fought to retain my composure and to deal with the death of this man I loved very much in a rational and controlled manner. Did people look at me the way I was looking at Patricia at this moment, wondering why I was not displaying the emotion they expected of me? Of course. There were countless moments alone when I broke down and allowed my grief to pour out in a torrent of tears. Perhaps that's what would happen the moment we left. Patricia Brent would go to her room, close the door, and cry her heart out. "Ready?" Mort asked Robert. "I have to get my coat," he said. "Good idea," Mort said. "Nasty day out there and getting worse." Robert returned from the vestibule wearing the black and red wool mackinaw. "You take care, Mrs. Brent," Mort said, touching Patricia on the shoulder. "Just give a yell if there's anything I can do for you." "And that goes for me too, Patricia," I said. "Please don't hesitate to call if I can help you with funeral arrangements or anything else." "You're both very kind," she said. We went to the front door, opened it, and stepped out onto the porch. As Patricia was about to close the door behind us, she said wistfully, "Rory is dead. Hard to believe. I expect to see him walking in here any minute." I swallowed the lump in my throat and managed a small smile. I was glad to see some sign that she recognized the grim reality of the situation. Maud opened the front passenger door of his car for me, but I sensed that Robert was disappointed at being relegated to the rear. "Perhaps you'd like to sit up front," I said. My suggestion brought a hint of pleasure to his face. Maud started to protest, but I said, "No, I'll be very comfortable in the back." I was glad I made the decision to give up my front seat to Rob Brent. As we proceeded toward town, he became almost animated, questioning Maud about the array of electronic communications gear wedged between the two front seats. Maud readily answered all the questions and even demonstrated the use of the radio by calling headquarters. "This is Medja," he said into the handheld phone. "On my way back in with Robert Brent. Should be there 15-20 minutes. Over." A voice came through the speaker. "Roger," I read. "Over and out," Maud said. We both sensed that Robert would have liked to use the mobile phone too, but Maud was not about to go that far. As we pulled into the main part of Kaput Cove, Maud turned and asked, "Straight home, Mrs. F, or drop you some other place?" "Home, if you don't mind." As we approached the street on which I live, I noticed 2 cars parked in front of my house. "Looks like you've got company," Maud said. "Appears that way." He turned into my driveway. I got out and came around to where Maud sat behind the wheel. He lowered his window. "Thanks for the ride," I said. I looked across to where Robert sat and said, "I'm very sorry about your father, Robert. Please tell your mother again to call if I can be of help." His response was a glum nod and to turn away from me. Strange young man, I thought, as I approached my front door. To my surprise, it opened and I was greeted by Seth Hazlett. Seth and I have keys to each other's houses and don't hesitate to make ourselves at home in either one. "Hello," I said. "I thought you had a waiting room full of patients this afternoon." I did, but a couple of them canceled last minute." As I stepped inside, I saw Cynthia Curtis, our head librarian and member of the town board, standing in the archway leading to my living room. "Hello, Cynthia. What a pleasant surprise." "Seth insisted I come," she said. "I just put water up for tea. Hope that's all right." "Sounds good to me," I said, hanging my coat up on the row of pegs and leading them into the living room. Seth had made a fire. I stood before it and rubbed my cold hands. "Feels wonderful," I said. I turned and asked, "What's up?" Seth did the talking. "Jessica, Cynthia came to me with a problem having to do with Rory Brent's murder." I looked at Cynthia of the car of Baracus, energetic mover and shaker in the Kabat Cove community. "A problem concerning you, Cynthia?" I asked. She seemed to look to Seth to continue, which he did. "It seems that everybody in town has already convinced Jake Welther of killing Rory." "That's terrible," I said. "How could people come to that conclusion so quickly?" Now Cynthia spoke. "I suppose it's because of Jake's reputation, Jess. You know how it is. Doctors with a pleasant bedside manner get sued less than the arrogant ones." We both looked at Seth. He smiled and said, "I certainly agree with that. Never been sued in my professional life and proud of it." "Jake has made so many enemies over the years," Cynthia said. "You know he has that mean streak in him that seems to come out at the worst possible moments. I don't suppose there's anyone who's lived here for any length of time who hasn't been crossed by him. At any rate, all everyone is talking about is that Jake murdered Rory Brent." I sat in a chair in front of the fireplace and looked into flames that were building. I understood her concern. Like a rumor gets legs, as they say. It's like the proverbial snowball rolling downhill. It suddenly struck me that Cynthia might be worried that townspeople would take matters into their own hands. I asked her if that was on her mind. Oh no, I don't think so, Jess. People here aren't like that. You never know, Seth said sternly. Certainly not at this time of year, I said. It's almost Christmas. Peace on earth. Goodwill towards men. And women, Cynthia added. And women, I said. You might be forgetting one thing, said Seth. What's that? I asked. It wasn't just Roy Brent, a farmer, who's been killed. It was Santa Claus. Initially, his comment struck me as funny, but it occurred to me just as quickly that there was a certain metaphorical truth to what he said. Roy Brent had become synonymous with Santa Claus and Kaboot Cub. He was an icon, a man loved throughout the year, but revered once he donned his red Santa costume with his furry white trim, floppy red and white hat, and shiny black boots. I stood and paced the room. If what you say is true, and I agree, there could be a problem having people running around already convicting Jake Walther. Then what we have to do is come up with a quick plan to put it to rest. Any suggestions? Maybe you should tell us what happened out at Roy's farm when you and Mort went out there, Seth said. I thought for a moment and said, well, there isn't much to say. The county police were there. It seems there's a little jurisdictional dispute between Mort and them. Patricia arrived while we were there. She was down visiting a cousin in Salem. She hadn't known about Roy's death. It wasn't pleasant being the ones to break the news. I came back in town with Mort and Robert Brent. You did? Said Cynthia. Yes. Mort wanted to interview him and thought headquarters was the best place to do it. He came readily enough. A bad seed, that boy, said Seth. Not terribly friendly, I agree, but I don't want to jump to conclusions about him the way you say others are ready to hang Jake Walther. Rob Brent had been telling Mort that he's convinced Jake killed his father. Not that means anything. Mort asked him whether he had seen Jake do it, and Rob said he hadn't. He and Mort are at police headquarters as we speak. I was thinking of calling an emergency meeting of the town board, Cynthia said. Make it an open meeting and invite the public. What do you think? I shrugged. I'm not sure it would accomplish much, Cynthia. It might even fan the flames. Maybe it's better to let it settle down on its own. Seems to me the only thing will settle it down is if Mort's investigation rules out Jake, said Seth. Until that happens, people will be looking at him like he's a murderer. Has anyone seen Jake since this happened, I asked. Seth and Cynthia shook their heads. I'm sure Mort would make interviewing Jake one of his top priorities, especially since Robert Brent is so adamant about pointing a finger at him. Maybe the best thing is to make Mort aware, if he isn't already, of the sentiment in town, and urge him to work as quickly as possible to either clear Jake or arrest him. Good suggestion, said Cynthia. Would you call Mort? Of course, I said. Let me give him a little time with Rob Brent before I do. Our conversation was interrupted by the whistling tea kettle. After I served them and myself, I said, anything else on the agenda? Matter of fact, there is, said Seth. My arched eyebrows indicated I was waiting to hear what it was. We've got to decide who's going to play Santa Claus this year, now that Rory is gone. A good question, I said. Any suggestions? I've had some discussions with a few people from the festival committee, Cynthia said. Any interesting idea came up. On more ears, I said. You. I looked at Seth. Me? Interesting notion, wouldn't you agree? Seth said politically correct as they say. Might be a real good thing for Kaboot Cove to have the first woman Santa. I couldn't help but gulp. That's ridiculous, I said. Not the concept of having a woman as Santa Claus, but this woman, I hate to be vain, but I really don't think I look the part. That wouldn't be a problem, Cynthia said. Always easy to make somebody look heavier than they are. You know, pillows strapped around the waist, that sort of thing. Absolutely not, I said. I glanced at Seth. Have you ever considered being Santa Claus, Dr. Hazlett? No, and I don't intend to at this stage in my life. Too old to have all those little kids jumping up and down on my bad knees. You think about it, Jessica. Probably gets us lots of media attention having a female Santa and all. You know, television shows, maybe a reporter from a big paper would give everybody a caboodle, cause a hit, a boost. Well, I said, I will not think any more about it because it is absurd. I think we're much better focusing our attention on how to diffuse this situation concerning Drake Waltham. There are many good candidates in this town for taking Roy's place as Santa. I'm not one of them. I'll call more as soon as you leave. I didn't mean to say it in such a way that I wanted them out of the house, but I suppose it came off that way because they both stood and thanked me for the tea and said they'd get back to me later after I had a chance to talk with Mort. I was happy when they were gone, but not because I didn't love being with them, but because it had been such a hectic, traumatic day. I needed some quiet time to think about what had transpired. I made another cup of tea and went into my den that also serves as my writing room. I was between books, as they say, which was a pleasant change. Too often I was facing deadlines around the holiday season and swore every year I wouldn't allow it to happen. This time things felt right and I was free to enjoy the holidays. I called Mort a half hour later and was told he returned to the Brent farm with Robert Brent. I left a message and decided to spend an hour catching up on correspondence I let slip over the past week. I just settled down to respond to a letter I received from an old friend and former mayor of Cabot Cove, Seabell Woodhouse, who moved earlier that year to California with her husband, Adrian. When I heard a knock at the door, I glanced out my den window. I hadn't noticed that snow had now begun to fall with convention and the wind had picked up, sending the flakes swirling. A bad night to be out, I thought, as I got up from my writing desk and went to the front door, where I pulled aside a curtain on one of the side windows. Standing there was Mary Walther, Jake Walther's wife. Like, comment, and subscribe on this video. Bye.